Welcome back to Grumpy Vet Garage. Today we're not in my garage, but we're at Two Brothers Performance in Sumter, South Carolina. They're located about 10 minutes from Shaw Air Force Base. They're a full-service performance shop working on import and domestic vehicles, naturally aspirated or forced induction. They do performance engine and manual transmission builds, and they have extensive experience building race drivetrains for themselves and their customers. Today specifically, Brandon, one of the owners of Two Brothers Performance, is doing final checks and assembly on his Turbo Civic race engine.
Today we are checking our valve-to-valve clearance right now, and then after we get done with the valve-to-valve clearance, we'll be installing the head on my block, and then we will be degreeing the cams and checking piston-to-valve clearance. So
Awesome.
Right now, it's a little bit hard to see, but your standard springs and retainers are like this. I've got some real tiny lightweight dummy springs installed in two of the valves.
Okay.
So it makes turning the motor you're turning the head really easy.
Okay.
So you always set your valve latch to 0, and then you get a crappy old or cheap timing belt, and you put everything in time, and you clamp it together. Now you're simulating the actual motor running.
Gotcha.
And then as you rotate the motor over, you can see your valve to valves and see what kind of clearance you have in between the two of them and how close they get. That way when you actually go to green the cams, you'll know if you're in an okay zone. This head is locked VTEC, so I don't have to worry about locking that. But
Okay.
other cars, other Hondas in particular, when you're doing all your degreeing, you have to lock VTEC because that's when you're going to have the most amount of valve. And then we build this cool little chart. And these are all my cam charts. I do this for every single motor with cams in it. So every single motor gets its valve-to-valve chart made. And then all this is just your degrees on your intake and exhaust.
Okay.
And you find out what is going to clear.
So you are not. This isn't something you're eyeballing. You're actually taking feeler gauge and you're measuring.
Yep. Measuring
Is there
space.
what would be the tightest limit that would be acceptable? Because valves, even though they're moving linearly, they can.
Yeah, you do have a little bit of wobble in your guides and things like that, depending on how loose your stuff is. I typically go 35,000. These things are spinning 10,000 RPMs, and any kind of variation, I want to make sure I'm well in the safe.
You're talking knife edge of performance here. You're talking.
Correct.
You're not. Yeah. This isn't daily driver getting groceries. This is going and getting a trophy.
Yeah, these are billet wed 2-lobe cams. They're not a reground cam. I mean, they're full billet steel with their custom extended pad rockers and yeah, stainless and Inconel valves. So we're at our 0, then we start turning. All right, well, we clearly have way more than 35 thousandths in our clearance there. So 0 to 0. We got 0 and we got 0. That means we are good there. So now I'll just pick an arbitrary number on one of the gears and I'll advance one side 5 degrees and then see where that puts me. And okay, the gap got way farther. Okay, I'm super good. And then I'll go back the opposite direction. Okay, now it's super tight.
Gotcha. Yeah. And then this gives you a history of this particular head.
Correct.
And it lets you know, like, hey, can I do this? The answer is no, I can't.
Yep,
or
exactly.
yes, I can.
Yep. I've got my cam grind specs, whose motor this is, being mine in particular, what head it is, what kind of gears it has, what cams it has, what valve train it has. I have all the information on this head. And every single motor that we build or degree, I mean, I have charts of every single one.
Gotcha. So the good thing is, with you doing this on every head basically you're building for a customer, they can have the peace of mind of knowing they're not going to have to memorize everything. You've charted out their head for them.
Yep, and if people want this, I can provide it to them, but most people think, oh, if I put Skunk 2 cams in and this is my cam chart, I'll just keep buying those same cams and I never have to pay to degree them again, which is completely false. Every cam is different, every head is different, everything is different.
Gotcha. As an amateur like me, when you just said that, I knew where you were going, but I was like, yeah, I could see me thinking that.
Yep.
So that's a pretty common practice. So just because it's the same brand and the same cam, they're different.
Yeah, you could have every single part in the same head, and your chart will be completely different.
It's like, for instance, we'll just say Skunk 2, for instance. They make cams, but every cam they ever made for that motor didn't all get made at one time in one setup. So they turn around and later on we're going to make the cams again because there's a high demand for them. They got to set their machine up again, and any variance they have in there, when we're talking about thousandths of an inch, it doesn't take much. And they're going to have specs and variants like, oh yeah, it's within our spec. And their spec isn't going to be 0.
Oh, wow, that's a pretty tight.
Yep, that's 35.
Okay. So they're right at your limit right now.
Yep, that's my 35.
What is the cam? What is the lift on these cams?
Valve lift of 525,000.
That's a lot.
Yep. And then the duration's at 260 at 50 thousandths, and then my exhaust is a lift of 507. 35, so this one's ready to come back apart. Put my real springs back in the side of the dummy, and then clean the bottom, clean the block surface, and put it all together. With some of the webcams, the first cams we put together on my brother's head, the chart was really, really wide open, which is fine, but I ended up at like -1 on the exhaust, +9 on the intake.
Yeah.
I was like, it seemed odd, but it still got our lobe center where we needed to be. And then after contacting Webb, they said some of their cams, when they're manufactured, their keyway is sometimes off an entire tooth.
Okay.
So I started at 1 tooth one way, and when I checked, I had all kinds of clearance. And I jumped one side all the way to 10, still had all kinds of clearance. All right, so I flipped it to the other tooth from center line, and then that's when I ended up. Now my chart is where it should be.
But this is a prime example that cam companies are expecting that when you buy cams, you are going to check them.
Yep,
okay.
Exactly. And I have never once ever seen a true drop in cam. And yes, you might be able to drop it in at 0 and it'll make power, but degreeing it 1 degree, when we first started messing around with cam degree, we knew what it was supposed to be, and then we had our chart. And so we started moving the degrees on the dyno. We were picking up 50 horsepower on the CRX per degree we were moving on the exhaust. This is the difference in Webb's rockers compared to a stock rocker.
Okay.
And so their whole pad is longer versus.
Gotcha.
And then you can see where the cam's actually been wearing on this rocker versus where it wouldn't be touching at all on a stock rocker.
So this is a install tool, right, that you could use. So
This one's a pretty generic. I'm pretty sure this one came off of Amazon for like $20. It fits all the common VTEC heads.
Okay.
B series and H series, and I have another tool 4K series. Yeah.
Brandon's over here putting the valve springs and retainers back in his head before he installs it, and then I realized there's this massive turbo over here on the floor. So very beautiful welding too. So here is Brandon's race engine.
Yep, that's the motor for the car.
Real quick, what you got?
This is a perfect circle engine, closed deck sleeve block, O-ringed. They're JJ AutoWorks, very, very heavy duty pistons. They've got inline pro extreme duty rods with 7/16 rod bolts. Our buddy Nick at Perfect Circle Engines does all of our heavy machine work, all the sleeving, all that kind of stuff. He does all the CNC work. My head's CNC ported, all by Nick.
Okay.
And then our buddy Dante in town does all of our final machine work, all the boring, honing, that kind of stuff.
So again, copper O-ring you told me before, but this is this a pretty standard Cometic multi-layer steel?
Regular run-of-the-mill Cometic gasket. That's what we use on all of the builds. We've never had an actual head gasket failure because of head gasket. The way with all the head studs we use and all the copper O-rings, every block gets O-ringed. I mean, this B series over here is going to be a guy's daily driver, sleeved and O-ringed.
Gotcha.
So every single one gets O-rings.
So it really doesn't matter what the application, whether or not it's street or race, an O-ring block is great.
Yep.
Okay. And then as far as fasteners, what fasteners do you use in your race block?
I am using Inline Pro M12 head studs.
Okay.
A lot of ARP head studs. ARP are still fantastic products. We still use them in a lot of stuff, but your standard ARPs, I think I got some I can show you the comparison.
Okay.
A lot of your standard ARPs will neck down in between the threads versus how this one is a true M12 stud the whole length.
Oh, okay.
And this one's a regular ARP 2000 for the same motor, so you can see
you can see it. It's very slight, but it's definitely there.
And then how these ones are a true 12 stud.
Power goal it might have with this, or is there not a power goal specifically?
1300 horsepower.
So 1300 horsepower. So he just put in a stud, and there was ultra torque from ARP on the top, but not on the bottom. And you were saying that normally you would lube or put oil on the bottom, but you clean your block, and as you should, clean all the holes really, really well.
Yep.
So you're putting them in dry, but these studs, they're not torqued in at all, right? There's not like a low torque. These aren't.
I think the torque is like 29 inch-pounds.
Which is pretty much hand
tight. Yeah, snug.
So this is you told me this is a factory stroke motor, and in fact the crank in it is a factory Honda crank.
Yes.
Which, coming from DSM, that kind of blew me away a little bit. Yeah. But it's still at the factory stroke. What RPM are you going to try to turn this at?
It all depends on where the cams are going to be happy at.
Okay.
I'll be surprised if I see less than 10,000 consistently.
10,000. Okay. So Brandon already ran down studs flush hand tight, and he's already ran down all the nuts on the studs hand tight. Now he's coming in to torque them to
30, 60, and then 85.
Okay. So right now you're only installing one set, you said?
Yep, just on the cylinder one, and then that way I'm not fighting the resistance of the whole motor while trying to make small itty bitty changes.
Because you're setting it up to degree the cams, correct?
Yep.
So this is a properly timed and installed belt?
Yep. Yeah, I mean, it might be a smidge on the tight side. Your factory spec is typically you want to be able to turn it 90 degrees without much resistance.
Okay.
I've got it a little bit tight right now just for degreeing purposes, but when I fully assemble it, I'll actually run this a little bit looser, and I have a secondary tensioner that bolts on the head and takes up the slack on the long side of the belt. So after everything is zeroed out, we've found true top dead of the motor, and put our top dial indicator there. Then made our timing wheel with our pointer at 0, and then we've also zeroed each individual cam position. I've rotated the motor 5 or 6 times and confirmed that all of this is still 0, and it is. There has been times where the pointer will drag, or this will get caught on something, or caught on the rocker, and it'll skew your measurements, and you'll be chasing your tail for hours trying to figure out why nothing is lining up. Okay. When you buy aftermarket cams, they give you an advertised lobe center, and that's where the true peak lift, peak duration, everything else is. So right now, we're measuring to find out where the actual peak of the cam is, and getting it in the most efficient position.
Gotcha.
Yep. And then once you find your most efficient position, then you can move both of your cam gears in sequence one way or another to move your power range down or up in the RPMs. I'm starting at 0 and 0, and we'll see what happens. Right, okay. So 50 degrees. Now we're at 61.5, 66.5. That's exhaust open.
So that was you just looking for when the exhaust started to open?
Correct. Intake open should be my next event. 50 thousandths intake open. The next event should be exhaust closed. Puts me at 25. And intake closed. 3. And then you do some math. Exhaust open plus exhaust closed plus 180 gives you a number. 6.5 plus 25 plus 180 gives me 271.5. 271.5 divided by 2 gives me 135.75 minus exhaust close. Minus 25 gives me 110.75, and my exhaust needs to be at 112. So we're close, so we probably need to move that one like a degree. 33 plus 43 plus 180 is 256. 256.
So you hear all the time that, you need to degree your cam, And what Brandon's just shown is, yes, you need to degree your cam, because what is listed by the keyway as being 0 actually isn't 0.
Yep, so putting at 0, 0, My exhaust is at 110.75 and it needs to be 112. My intake is at 95 and it needs to be 106. So
wow,
they are.
That's actually pretty good size.
Yep, they are not where they need to be. Now, would the motor run like this? Sure, but it is not. It is not max effort, peak efficiency, and that's what I want out of a race car.
So right now, Brandon is making an adjustment to his timing based on what he just found in the while degreeing it. But the thing is, he still needs to put it in practice and try it again. Yeah. So make an adjustment and then verify. So there's no like, I'm going to do math and then suddenly I'm done. No, you need to do math and then actually put that math into use and show that it actually does work.
All right, so we will advance it 1 degree on the exhaust. Intake needs to go minus 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then after I make my semi-educated guess on where I want to check next, I confirm with my chart that I'm still in my valve-to-valve clearance. So in intake, I went to -5, so that put me over here. Exhaust put me +1, so I'm right there in relation to my
no-go zone.
Yep. So
okay.
I am still way clear on valve-to-valve, so nothing to worry about.
So there's multiple things coming together right now. You're agreeing you can, but you're also verifying that you're not getting into valve-to-valve clearance problems.
Yep. And then once I'm done with all this, we'll stick a borescope in there and check my piston to valve and make sure that I still got clearance, which I should. I don't have oversized valves. I don't have anything super crazy, but with these ginormous cams, you never really know without knowing. Exhaust is on the nuts at 112.5 degrees, so I ain't gonna be able to knock off a 0.5.
Chasing a half degree right now is kind of pointless because you're very well gonna move this anyways.
It very, very possibly.
Okay.
Yep. We never have. After I've degreed them, where we put them on the dyno, we've been super ecstatic with the power, so we've never went hunting. But
and that's because of the quality cams you're purchasing. You're already purchasing a product that's proven. You're just making sure to dial it in.
And this is my favorite part of the engine build. The checking bearing clearances is like you got to know what you're doing, but it's pretty repetitive. And once you do it enough, you know, I'm looking for this much. I split the shell with this, and I get there. Every single cam is different. Every motor is different. I get to actually do it different every time. I mean, you saw how fast I torqued the head down.
You're making a huge difference right here.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm really, really finding the fine tune. Let's see what 6 does. Advance my intake, my center line goes down. Advance the exhaust, my center line goes up. So after I saw my first numbers and realized, okay, exhaust needs to go up, I started advancing it.
Okay.
Intake needed to go up, so I started retarding it. So I take notes to help speed up my process because clearly this is not a fast process to be done right. And even then, I'm getting pretty lucky that I've only had to do it 3 times to be pretty on the spot.
Yeah.
I'm only doing it a 4th just for gee whiz to see if that gets me even more where I want to be. Instead of being at 0, my exhaust ended up at +1 and my intake ended up at -6.5 to get to true lobe center line.
Gotcha.
That's why you check. Because sure, it would have run, but 6.5 degrees on one and 1 on the other, that's a pretty big margin.
The power you would lose from not having that degree at, say, when you're only trying to make 400 horsepower, does that get amplified as power goes up?
Yeah.
So it's like an exponential growth of your you lost 10 horsepower, and then as you move up, that turns into you lost 30 horsepower, you lost 100 horsepower.
Yep. Because our turbos are so big that our efficiency range is so high in the boost level that any little thing we can do to get the air in and out more efficiently really matters.
Okay.
When you're in such a small horsepower range, I mean, 400 is still a lot to a lot of people.
It is a lot of people.
Which is fair. Yeah. But you can put a turbo on a stock motor and make 400 and not do anything to see that. You're just letting the turbo do all the work. And you put a smaller turbo on, all that kind of stuff. Our turbos are so ginormous that we're not even seeing boost pressure into like the 4,000 RPMs, which in a daily driver car, you're almost ready to shift.
Yeah.
So
yep.
The efficiency really matters for the power goal we're trying to see. And I mean, even a daily driver car that someone brings me, if it's got aftermarket cams, they get degree.
They get degree.
Because Nathan's, like I was telling you earlier, when we were moving, we were only moving his exhaust cam 1 degree at a time.
Mm-hmm.
In the 40 pounds of boost, we were picking up 50 horsepower per degree we were moving it.
It's a lot.
And then when we got to a degree that it only made like 2 more power, we went back 1. And then we reconfirmed with my chart, and where we moved it back to was where we started with.
Okay.
So it was degreed properly, and we had time on the dyno, and our tuner Justin is super helpful, and he helps us out a bunch, and he's always got, I don't want to say he's always got time on his hands, but he always makes time for us.
Mm-hmm.
So we were like, well, let's see how important this really is on a turbo application. And so he's like, yeah, we got time. So we started playing with the degrees and doing pools and not changing anything other than a little bit of air, a little bit of timing, just because the cam changed, but start picking up a bunch of horsepower. We're like, holy crap, this is rather important.
But that really, from that practical knowledge, that confirms that the green cams are super important,
mm-hmm.
but also the research and development that a good cam company puts in, that if you dial their cams in properly, there's tons of power to be made.
Yep. And
so
we run webcams in the CRX. These are the cams that are going in my motor. We bought some for some customer motors that we're putting together. Faith and everybody else up at Web has really helped us out. We told them, hey, this is what the car's doing. This is the fuel we're on. This is the RPMs we're turning. This is what we want to see. And she comes back with, okay, this is the grind you need. Yeah. And they are.
And that's awesome because they have all that experience and they're able to deliver on what you're asking from them.
Exactly. And we've never been let down. I mean, the CRX makes 1,100 and some change on 42 pounds of boost, and we race at 50-something pounds. So it's probably in the 12 to close to 1,300 range. 42 pounds of boost on a 72 millimeter turbo with a 4-inch charge pipe. So
nice.
We're flowing a lot of volume. And that's it for cam degree. The motor will take all this stuff back apart. I'll put the rest of the rockers and stuff in, torque everything down, and this motor's done. Ready to go in my car.
Cool. Again, Two Brothers Performance is a full-service performance shop working on import and domestic vehicles. They do performance engine and manual transmission builds. Best way to reach them is through their Facebook page, which is linked in the video description. If you like this kind of content, please consider subscribing to Grumpy Vet Garage, liking this video, sharing this video. Additionally, to support the channel, we have a Grumpy Vet Garage merch store. Link to that store is in the video description. Thanks for coming and seeing me in the garage, and until next time, have a good one.